The late afternoon sun shimmered over the harbor in Bayshore Cove, casting ripples of gold across the water. Families filled the wooden bleachers of the Marine Park's open-air arena, their chatter mixing with the distant cries of gulls. Children leaned forward against the railing, eyes wide with excitement, waiting for the stars of the show to appear. On the pool's edge stood Maren Holt, a 17-year-old with sandy blonde hair pulled into a loose braid and a wetsuit still damp from rehearsal. But she wasn't the only reason the crowd had gathered. Beside her, slicing through the water with effortless grace, was a bottlenose dolphin named Salas. His skin gleamed silver in the sunlight, his dark eyes holding a spark that seemed almost human. Maren and Salas were more than just a performer and an animal, they were a team, bound by years of trust and a friendship that had grown deeper than most people could imagine. Together, they delivered a show that drew visitors from towns all across the state, choreographed jumps, playful splashes, and tricks so perfectly timed it was as if they could read each other's minds. Their story went back to when Maren was 13. Her older brother had taken a summer job at the park, and one afternoon, she wandered to the rehabilitation pool. There, floating still and quiet, was Salas, fresh from a rescue after being entangled in a fishing line. Most dolphins kept their distance from strangers, but not him. He swam right to her, letting out a curious click as if he'd been waiting for her. From that moment on, she came back every day, helping feed him, learning his signals, and eventually earning the trainer's trust enough to work with him in the water. When Salas was declared healthy enough for public shows, the park paired him permanently with Maren. In the pool, she found a confidence she didn't have anywhere else. At school she was shy, content to blend into the background. But with Salas, she was fearless. He made her laugh when she was down, nudged her arm when she was nervous, and seemed to sense her moods better than most people. That Saturday's show went off perfectly. Salas leapt through hoops, balanced a ball on his rostrum, and carried Maren across the pool on his back while the audience erupted in applause. When the performance ended, most people drifted toward the exits, but Maren stayed behind, crouching at the water's edge to give him his favorite treat, fresh sardines and a gentle scratch behind the dorsal fin. The sun was low, the water glowing with the colors of the sky. This was always Maren's favorite part, no crowd, no noise, just her and Salas. But something was off tonight. He swam tight circles, faster than usual. When she tossed him a fish, he let it sink untouched. His clicks came quicker, sharper. She leaned closer. "What's wrong, Salas?" she murmured. He surfaced, locking eyes with her, and there was a tension in his gaze she had never seen before, something urgent, almost warning. What Maren didn't know was that the trainers had already been discussing his behavior in hushed tones. He'd been restless for days, breaking formation during practice, ignoring signals. They had theories, stress, boredom, but none that explained the growing unease. The next afternoon, the arena was packed again. Maren dove in for their signature move, Salas lifting her on his back to glide across the pool. But instead of feeling him rise beneath her, there was a sharp jolt to her side. She spun in surprise, only for him to circle back and ram her again, harder. Gasps rose from the crowd. She surfaced, coughing. "Salas," she called. But before she could move away, he surged forward and gripped her arm in his mouth, not hard enough to draw blood, but tight enough to pull her under. The water swallowed her voice. Panic exploded in her chest. She kicked and struggled, the familiar shape of her friend suddenly feeling like a force she didn't recognize. Above, whistles blew and trainers shouted. Two of them dove in, splashing hard to reach her. The audience's excitement had turned into terrified screams. When they finally pulled her onto the deck, she lay coughing, her arm throbbing. Salas was thrashing against the net barrier, his squeals echoing across the arena. The sound wasn't angry, it was desperate. But to Maren, it no longer felt like the friend she knew. For the first time in 4 years, she looked into his eyes and felt like she was staring at a stranger. That night, wrapped in a towel in the break room, she kept replaying it over and over, searching for a sign she'd missed, a moment that might explain why. She didn't know yet, but the answer would shake her more than the attack itself. The next morning, the marine park felt different to Maren. The air was heavy, the usual hum of activity subdued. Trainers spoke in quiet voices, avoiding her gaze as she walked past. She knew they had questions, but so did she, and hers were heavier. Salas wasn't in the main pool that morning. Instead, he had been moved to a smaller holding enclosure at the far end of the facility, away from visitors. Maren stood at the chain-link gate, watching him through the clear water. He swam in slow, restless loops, his dorsal fin slicing the surface like a blade. Every so often, he would rise and make a low whistle that sounded almost like a call. She wanted to believe what had happened yesterday was an accident, some kind of misunderstanding. But the bruise on her arm told a different story. Coach Ramsey, the park's head trainer, approached quietly. He was in his 50s, his face tanned and weathered from years of working outdoors. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," Maren replied automatically, though her throat tightened. "Why is he in there?" "Precaution," Ramsey said. "We can't risk a repeat. We're reviewing footage, checking for environmental factors." Sometimes dolphins react unpredictably if something in their surroundings changes, water chemistry, unfamiliar scents, even certain noises. But it wasn't just random, Maren said, stepping closer to the fence. "He looked at me. Like he was trying to tell me something." Ramsey hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe he's stressed. It's mating season for wild pods. That can stir instincts we don't always see in captivity." She hated the way he said captivity. She'd never thought of Salas as a captive. To her, the park was his home. But now, that word made her chest ache. That afternoon, Maren snuck back to the holding pool. The other trainers were busy with the sea lion show, so no one stopped her. She crouched by the edge and tapped the water gently. Salas surfaced immediately, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You scared me," she whispered. "Why'd you do it?" He let out a burst of clicks and a sharp whistle, then dove under. When he came back, he nudged something toward her. A smooth, broken piece of plastic about the size of her palm. She frowned, taking it in her hand. It was jagged on one side, like it had snapped off from something larger. The next day, while the park staff inspected the pool's filtration system, Maren learned where it came from. One of the maintenance workers told her a large section of the outer netting barrier had been damaged, likely by a boat propeller a few nights earlier. It wasn't enough for Salas to escape, but it left a small gap to the open bay beyond. Maren's stomach tightened. Wild dolphins sometimes swam near the bay, and if Salas had sensed them, that could explain his agitation. But it didn't explain the plastic shard, or why he'd forced her underwater. That night, lying awake, she replayed the moment in her mind. The feel of his grip. The way he didn't thrash or shake her like prey, he just held her and pulled her down. Almost like he was trying to lead her somewhere. The next morning, she went to see him again. This time, she brought her wetsuit. Ramsey would be furious if he found out, but she had to know. She slipped into the holding pool quietly. Salas swam to her instantly, pressing his head to her chest. "Okay," she whispered. "Show me." He swam ahead slowly, glancing back to be sure she followed. Then, with a deep dive, he led her toward the far wall of the pool where the damaged section had been temporarily patched with heavy mesh. Maren's eyes widened. Caught in the fibers was another piece of plastic, larger this time, with a sharp, twisted edge. It was the kind of debris that could injure or kill a dolphin if swallowed or if it drifted loose in the water. Salas hovered beside it, clicking urgently. She realized, in a rush of breath, what he'd been doing that day in the main pool. He hadn't attacked her. He'd been trying to drag her under to show her something. But if that was true, another question rose, heavier than the rest. If Salas had been warning her, why had no one else seen it? And what else might be lurking beyond that damaged barrier in the bay? By the time Maren climbed out of the water, her hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization settling in her chest. Salas hadn't turned on her. He'd been trying to communicate, to draw her attention to something the humans around him had ignored. She wrapped herself in a towel and paced the narrow walkway beside the holding pool. If debris was drifting in from the bay, it wasn't just dangerous for Salas, it was dangerous for every animal in the marine park. But the trainers were focused on repairing the net, not on what might have come through before they noticed the damage. That afternoon, Maren waited for Ramsay to be alone in the equipment shed before stepping in. She pulled the plastic shards from her backpack and set them on the counter. "This is what he showed me," she said. "It was caught in the net. There could be more." Ramsay glanced at it and sighed. "We already pulled a few pieces yesterday. Probably from some careless fisherman dumping trash." "No," Maren insisted. "He was trying to tell me about it before anyone found it. He dragged me under because he knew where it was." Ramsay gave her a tired look. "Maren, I know you care about him, but dolphins don't think like we do. Sometimes behavior is just behavior." She wanted to argue, but his tone made it clear the conversation was over. That night, after the park had closed, she returned. The moon lit the bay in silver, the sound of waves breaking against the docks filling the quiet. She slipped through the gate to the holding pool, wetsuit on, and tapped the water. Salas surfaced almost immediately, letting out a series of sharp clicks. "All right," she whispered. "Let's go see for ourselves." They swam together toward the far wall where the net met the bay. The repair crew had sealed most of the tear, but a narrow gap remained near the bottom. Salas dove, and Maren followed, her chest tightening as the water grew darker. The moment they slipped through, the change was immediate, the water outside felt colder, the current stronger. Salas stayed close, guiding her toward a shallow area near the base of a dock piling. That's when she saw it. A shadow moved in the water ahead, not a dolphin, but larger, with a heavy, lumbering motion. Her pulse quickened. As the shape came into the moonlight filtering through the water, she recognized the wide, flat head and jagged dorsal fin of a bull shark. It wasn't alone. Two smaller shapes circled behind it, their pale underbellies flashing as they turned. They were lingering close to the net's damaged section, moving slowly, as if testing the boundary. Maren's breath hitched. The debris in the net suddenly made sense, it wasn't just trash drifting in. Something had driven it there. And now she was in the water with predators far too close for comfort. Salas swam in front of her, positioning himself between her and the nearest shark. He let out a burst of loud clicks and tail slaps, a sound she recognized as agitation. The sharks turned, their movement deliberate. Maren's lungs burned as she backed toward the gap in the net. Salas circled her once, then darted toward the opening, clicking sharply as if urging her to follow. She didn't need telling twice. They slipped back into the safety of the holding pool just as her chest threatened to give out from lack of air. Maren clung to the side, gasping, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shake the water itself. Salas surfaced beside her, blowing a strong exhale through his blowhole. The image of the sharks burned in her mind. If they'd been able to push through the net, or if the gap had been wider, every animal in the park could have been at risk. And no one else knew. No one, except her. By the next morning, Maren could hardly sit still. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the dark shapes circling in the bay and the sound of Salas clicking urgently beside her. If she didn't speak up, someone could get hurt, or worse. She found Ramsay near the main pool, clipboard in hand, already giving orders to the morning crew. "We need to talk," she said firmly. "Not now," he muttered, flipping a page. "It's about the gap in the net. There are sharks out there, bull sharks, and they're staying close. I saw them last night. Ramsay froze, his pen halfway to the paper. Slowly, he turned to face her. You went out past the barrier. She hesitated. Yes. With Salas. He showed me where they were. His jaw tightened. Do you realize how dangerous that was? You could have been. I know what I saw, she cut in. And if they push through the net, the sea lions, the turtles, even Salas, they're all at risk. We have to fix it now, not next week. Ramsay rubbed the bridge of his nose. We've been running this park for 20 years without incident. I'll have the crew reinforce the section, but bull sharks don't usually hang around if there's no food source. They'll move on. Marin's stomach nodded. He didn't believe her, not really. Maybe he thought she was overreacting, or maybe he just didn't want to scare the staff. But if those sharks stayed, the danger wasn't going away. The rest of the day felt endless. She went through the motions of the show, smiling for the crowd, but every time she dove into the water, the image of the shark's black eye flashed in her mind. Salas seemed distracted too, surfacing more often, his gaze drifting toward the bay. That evening, as the park lights dimmed and the last of the visitors left, Marin made up her mind. She couldn't wait for the crew to get around to fixing the net. She would find a way to drive the sharks away herself. She slipped into the storage shed and found what she needed. An underwater noisemaker the trainers sometimes used to get Dolphin's attention from a distance. It emitted a high-pitched tone underwater, sharp and unpleasant to most marine animals. In theory, it might be enough to chase the sharks off. The sun was sinking when she slipped into the holding pool. Salas surfaced immediately, clicking softly. One more trip, she whispered. Then you'll be safe. They swam to the gap, the water darker now under the fading light. Marin's heart pounded as they passed through. The bay beyond felt heavier, the silence broken only by the distant hum of a boat engine. She didn't have to search long. The bull shark was back, gliding in slow circles near the net, the smaller ones lingering close. Her fingers tightened on the noisemaker. All right, she murmured, lifting it to her lips. She pressed the trigger. A piercing vibration shuddered through the water. The sharks twitched, tails snapping as they turned sharply away. Relief rushed through her, until she realized one of the smaller sharks wasn't retreating. Instead, it veered toward her, its movement quick, deliberate. Her pulse spiked. She kicked back toward the net, but the water felt slower now, thicker. Salas darted in front of her, slamming his body sideways into the shark's snout. The animal twisted, startled, then turned again, circling wider this time. Marin didn't look back. She pushed through the gap with Salas right beside her, breaking the surface with a gasp. Her hands gripped the pool's edge so tightly her knuckles ached. For a long moment, she just sat there, water streaming from her hair, chest heaving. Salas floated close, his eyes on her, and she realized with a shiver that if he hadn't been there, she might not have made it back. But the sharks weren't gone. They'd moved away for now, but they'd be back. And if the park didn't act fast, next time, no one might be there to stop them. Marin didn't tell Ramsay what had happened that night. She knew he'd just pull her from the shows and order her to stay away from the water until the net was repaired. That might keep her safe. But it wouldn't protect Salas or the other animals if the sharks decided to push through. The following day, she kept her head down, avoiding questions. But every time she caught sight of the bay beyond the arena, her stomach twisted. She'd learned something about the sharks' behavior last night. They weren't just wandering. They were waiting. That evening, long after the final show ended, Marin returned. The air was still and warm, the surface of the pool reflecting the glow of the dock lights. She crouched beside Salas, running her fingers along the smooth curve of his head. "This is it," she whispered. "One more time. I'm not letting them get close again." In her hand was a waterproof flare gun from the maintenance shed. It wasn't made for marine life, but the noise, light, and sudden movement could be enough to drive the sharks farther out into the open bay. If she did it right, they might not return at all. They slipped through the gap again, the cool open water closing around them. The moon was brighter tonight, casting pale silver beams into the depths. She spotted them almost immediately, the bull shark gliding near the bottom, the two smaller ones circling above. Her pulse hammered. She tightened her grip on the flare gun, aimed just past the bull shark, and fired. The flare hissed and roared as it cut through the water, trailing a burst of red light. The sharks reacted instantly, jerking away, their powerful tails churning the water as they vanished into the darkness. But her relief was short-lived. The sudden light had drawn attention from something else, something larger, lurking just beyond the glow. She caught only a glimpse of the wide head before the massive shadow surged forward. Another bull shark, bigger than the first. It closed the distance fast. Marin's breath caught, her limbs frozen, but Salas shot forward, slamming into the shark's flank with all his strength. The water erupted around them, the shark twisting in confusion before retreating into the deep. Marin's chest burned. She kicked hard for the gap, Salas swimming close at her side, nudging her forward when her strokes slowed. They broke through into the safety of the holding pool, both surfacing at once. She clung to the edge, gasping, the flare gun slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the deck. Salas floated beside her, blowing a heavy stream of air through his blowhole. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, her heart still racing, his eyes calm, steady, and full of the same unshakable trust she'd felt the day they met. The next morning, Marin didn't hide anything. She told Ramsay everything, the gap, the sharks, the nights she'd gone out, and how Salas had protected her every single time. She braced for anger, but instead, he was silent for a long while before finally saying, "You shouldn't have taken those risks, but you may have saved this park." Within 2 days, the net was replaced with reinforced steel mesh. The park brought in divers to scour the surrounding bay, ensuring no predators were lingering nearby. And through it all, Salas remained in his pool, occasionally glancing toward the open water, but no longer pacing with that restless urgency. The first show after the repairs was smaller than usual. The sun was warm on Marin's face as she dove into the water, and Salas rose beneath her just like old times, lifting her high before plunging into a perfect leap. The crowd's cheers washed over her, but all she really heard was the sound of his breath beside her. She'd seen the wild in him now, the part that no amount of training could tame. But she'd also seen his choice, time and again, to protect her when he could have left her behind. When the show ended, Marin stayed by the pool a little longer. Salas surfaced and pressed his head gently to her shoulder, and she whispered, "I get it now. You were never attacking me. You were trying to save me all along." The crowd had no idea what they had just witnessed wasn't just a performance, it was a friendship tested by fear, and made unbreakable by trust. And somewhere beyond the safety of the net, the open water waited. But for now, Marin knew Salas was exactly where he wanted to be.